Imagine you're sailing through the treacherous waters off the Scottish coast when you spot a lighthouse that should be guiding ships to safety. But something's wrong. The light isn't rotating. There's no signal. As you approach the rocky outcrop known as the Flannan Isles, an eerie silence greets you. Inside the lighthouse, you find a half-eaten meal still sitting on the table, chairs overturned, and 3 men who were supposed to be there have simply vanished without a trace. This isn't fiction. This is the true story of one of Scotland's most baffling maritime mysteries. A case that has haunted investigators for over 120 years and spawned countless theories, from giant waves to supernatural forces. What really happened to the 3 lighthouse keepers of Flannan Isle on that fateful December night in 1900? The Flannan Isles, also known as the 7 Hunters, sit like jagged teeth in the Atlantic Ocean, 20 miles west of the Isle of Lewis in Scotland's Outer Hebrides. These aren't your typical Scottish isles. They're a cluster of stark, uninhabitable rocks that have claimed countless ships over the centuries. The largest island, Eilean Mor, rises just 288 feet above sea level. But in these hostile waters, it might as well be Mount Everest. The islands earned their ominous nickname, the 7 Hunters, from their reputation for hunting down ships in the treacherous waters surrounding them. For centuries, sailors had demanded a lighthouse to guide them safely past these deadly obstacles. The sea here is notoriously unpredictable. Calm one moment, a raging tempest the next. In 1895, after years of lobbying from shipping companies and the relatives of drowned sailors, the Northern Lighthouse Board finally approved construction of a lighthouse on Eilean Mor. The project took 4 years to complete, requiring enormous effort to transport materials and workers to this isolated outpost. The lighthouse itself was an impressive structure, 75 feet tall, equipped with the latest Fresnel lens technology that could project its beam up to 24 miles out to sea. But building the lighthouse was only half the challenge. The real test would be keeping it operational in one of the most isolated and dangerous locations in the British Isles. Running a lighthouse in such a remote location required experienced, reliable men who could handle both the technical demands of the job and the psychological pressure of isolation. The Northern Lighthouse Board selected 3 seasoned professionals for the Flannan Isle assignment. Thomas Marshall, age 28, was the principal keeper, the man in charge of the operation. Despite his relatively young age, Marshall had years of experience at other lighthouse stations and was known for his meticulous attention to detail. He was married with children and had a reputation as a steady, dependable keeper who took his responsibilities seriously. James Duckett, 43, served as the second assistant keeper. Duckett was a lighthouse veteran with over 20 years of experience at various stations around Scotland. He was described by colleagues as a cheerful, sociable man who could maintain morale even in the most challenging conditions. His experience made him invaluable for training newer keepers and handling emergency situations. Donald MacArthur, 40, was the 3rd member of the team, serving as the occasional keeper. MacArthur had worked at several lighthouse stations and was known for his physical strength and practical skills. He was particularly valued for his ability to perform maintenance work and repairs under difficult conditions. The lighthouse operated on a rotation system. While 3 keepers lived on the island at any given time, a 4th keeper remained on shore leave. This meant that every few weeks, one keeper would be relieved by his replacement, ensuring that the men didn't become completely isolated for extended periods. The keepers lived in quarters built into the lighthouse structure itself. Their living space was cramped but functional, with a kitchen, sleeping quarters, and a common area. They had to be entirely self-sufficient, with supplies delivered by boat every few weeks, weather permitting. The job required not just technical expertise, but also the ability to work as a team in close quarters under stressful conditions. Life on Flannan Isle followed a strict routine that was essential for both the lighthouse's operation and the keeper's sanity. Every evening at sunset, the keepers would light the massive oil-burning lamp at the top of the lighthouse. Throughout the night, they took turns maintaining the light, ensuring it never went out, a responsibility that literally meant the difference between life and death for passing ships. The lighthouse's beam was created by a first-order Fresnel lens, a marvel of 19th-century engineering consisting of hundreds of precisely cut glass prisms. This lens could magnify the light from a single oil flame into a beam visible from 24 miles away. Maintaining this system required constant attention. Trimming wicks, refilling oil reservoirs, cleaning the lens, and adjusting the rotation mechanism that caused the light to flash in a distinctive pattern. During daylight hours, the keepers performed maintenance tasks, recorded weather observations, and maintained detailed logs of their activities. These logs were crucial. They provided the only communication link between the isolated keepers and the outside world. Every entry was dated and signed, creating an official record of life on the island. The keepers also maintained a flag system to communicate with passing ships. Different flag combinations could signal that all was well, that supplies were needed, or that there was an emergency. This system was their primary way of requesting help if something went wrong. Weather observation was another critical duty. The keepers recorded wind speed and direction, temperature, visibility, and sea conditions multiple times daily. This information was vital for shipping and weather forecasting, making the lighthouse keepers important contributors to maritime safety beyond just operating the light. Food and supplies arrived by boat every few weeks, weather permitting. The keepers had to be completely self-sufficient between supply runs, which meant careful rationing and meal planning. They grew what vegetables they could in a small garden and supplemented their diet with fish when possible. The lighthouse had been operating normally through most of December 1900. The last supply boat had visited on December 7th, bringing fresh provisions and mail from families. Everything appeared to be running smoothly, and the keepers seemed to be in good spirits. The official lighthouse log shows routine entries through December 13th. These entries, written in Thomas Marshall's careful handwriting, record normal lighthouse operations, weather conditions, maintenance activities, and the nightly lighting of the beacon. The entries are matter-of-fact and professional, showing no signs of concern or unusual circumstances. December 13th's entry, the last official record, notes, "Storm ended, sea calm. God is over all." This entry has puzzled investigators for decades. Weather records from nearby stations show that December 13th was indeed stormy, but the phrase "God is over all" was unusual for the typically factual log entries. What makes this entry even more mysterious is what happened next. According to some accounts, additional log entries were later discovered, written in an increasingly frantic tone. These entries allegedly described massive waves, equipment damage, and growing fear among the keepers. However, the authenticity of these later entries has been questioned by maritime historians, and they may have been embellished or fabricated by early investigators seeking to explain the mystery. What we know for certain is that after December 13th, the lighthouse's beam was observed by passing ships to be operating normally until December 15th. On the night of December 15th, the light went out and was never relit by the three keepers. The supply ship Hesperus was scheduled to make its regular run to Flannan Isle on December 20th, 1900. Captain James Harvey had made this journey many times before, but as his ship approached the island that December morning, something immediately felt wrong. The lighthouse beam, which should have been visible from miles away, was dark. As the Hesperus drew closer to the island's small harbor, Captain Harvey noticed other troubling signs. No signal flags were flying from the lighthouse, and there was no sign of activity on the island. Most disturbing of all, No one came to the harbor to meet the supply boat, a routine that the keepers had never before failed to follow. Captain Harvey sounded the ship's horn repeatedly, the sound echoing off the cliffs of Eilean Moor. The only response was the cry of seabirds and the crash of waves against the rocks. After waiting for nearly an hour, Harvey made the decision to send a landing party ashore. Joseph Moore, the relief keeper who was scheduled to begin his rotation on the island, volunteered to investigate. As Moore climbed the narrow path from the harbor to the lighthouse, he called out to his colleagues. His voice echoed back from the stone walls, but there was no human response. The lighthouse door was unlocked, which was unusual. The keepers typically secured the building when they were away from it. Moore pushed open the door and stepped inside, calling out again. The silence was absolute. What Moore found inside the lighthouse has become one of the most haunting crime scenes in maritime history. In the kitchen, he discovered a half-eaten meal still sitting on the table. The plates contained what appeared to be mutton and potatoes, with one chair pushed back as if someone had stood up suddenly. A second chair was overturned completely, lying on its side. The lighthouse's main lamp was prepared for lighting but had not been lit. The lens was clean, the oil reservoir was full, and the wicks were trimmed. Everything was ready for the night's operation, but the lamp had never been ignited. Moore's investigation revealed more puzzling details. The lighthouse's official logbook was lying open on the table, but the last entry was dated December 13th. The keeper's outdoor clothing was missing. Heavy coats and boots that they would have worn in December weather were nowhere to be found. However, their indoor clothing and personal effects remained in their quarters. Most mysteriously, the lighthouse's massive door, which was designed to withstand Atlantic storms, was not only unlocked but slightly ajar. The keepers would never have left the lighthouse unsecured, especially not in December weather. Joseph Moore's discovery sent shockwaves through the maritime community. Captain Harvey immediately dispatched additional men to search the island while he sent urgent messages to the mainland reporting the disappearance. The search of Eilean Moor was thorough but ultimately fruitless. The island, measuring only 39 acres, offered few places where 3 men could be hidden. Search teams combed every cliff, cave, and crevice, looking for any sign of the missing keepers. What they found only deepened the mystery. At the island's west landing, searchers discovered that a large iron box containing emergency supplies had been damaged and scattered. The box, which was normally secured well above the high tide line, appeared to have been struck by massive waves. However, the damage seemed inconsistent with normal storm conditions. More troubling was the discovery of rope and tackle that had been torn from its moorings at the west landing. This equipment was designed to withstand severe weather, yet something had destroyed it completely. The destruction suggested forces far beyond what typical Atlantic storms could produce. The lighthouse itself showed no signs of damage. The beam mechanism was in perfect working order. The living quarters were undisturbed except for the abandoned meal, and all equipment was accounted for. Whatever had happened to the keepers had not damaged the lighthouse structure. One of the most puzzling aspects of the search was the absence of any distress signals. The keepers had multiple ways to call for help: signal flags, emergency flares, and even a small boat that could be used to reach the mainland in extreme circumstances. None of these emergency measures had been used. The search expanded to include nearby islands and the Scottish mainland. Coastal communities were alerted to watch for any sign of the missing men or their bodies. Boats scoured the waters around the Flannan Isles, hoping to find some trace of what had happened. But the 3 lighthouse keepers had vanished as completely as if they had never existed. No bodies were ever found, no evidence of their fate was ever discovered, and no credible witness ever came forward with information about their disappearance. The disappearance of the Flannan Isle lighthouse keepers sparked immediate speculation and investigation. The Northern Lighthouse Board launched a formal inquiry, and various theories emerged to explain the mystery. The rogue wave theory became the most widely accepted explanation. Investigators theorized that a massive wave, larger than anything the keepers had previously experienced, had struck the island while at least one keeper was working outside. The theory suggested that this keeper was swept away, and his colleagues died attempting to rescue him. Supporting this theory was the evidence of damage at the West Landing and the fact that the keeper's outdoor clothing was missing. Weather records showed that severe storms had struck the area around the time of the disappearance, and the North Atlantic was known for producing extraordinarily large waves during winter storms. However, the rogue wave theory had significant problems. The lighthouse sat well above the normal reach of even the largest waves, and the keepers were experienced professionals who understood the dangers of their environment. It seemed unlikely that all three men would have been outside during dangerous conditions, especially since their training emphasized that at least one keeper should remain in the lighthouse at all times. The accident theory suggested that one keeper had suffered an accident while working on the island, and the other two had died attempting to rescue him. This could explain why all three men were missing, but it didn't account for the lack of any distress signals or the orderly state of the lighthouse. The murder theory proposed that the keepers had been killed by someone who had landed on the island, possibly smugglers or shipwreck survivors. However, this theory was weakened by the lack of any evidence of violence, the absence of robbery, the keeper's personal effects and the lighthouse's valuable equipment were untouched, and the extreme difficulty of reaching the island without being detected. More exotic theories emerged as well. Some suggested that the keepers had been abducted by foreign agents, while others proposed supernatural explanations involving sea monsters or alien abduction. These theories, while capturing public imagination, lacked any credible evidence. The official investigation, led by Superintendent Robert Muirhead of the Northern Lighthouse Board, concluded that the most likely explanation was that the keepers had been swept away by an unusually large wave while attempting to secure equipment at the West Landing. This conclusion was based on the evidence of storm damage and the absence of any signs of violence or deliberate abandonment. However, many maritime experts remained unsatisfied with this explanation. The keepers' experience and training made it unlikely that they would have all been outside during dangerous conditions. The absence of any distress signals suggested that whatever happened occurred suddenly and without warning. More than 120 years after the disappearance, the fate of Thomas Marshall, James Duckett, and Donald MacArthur remains unknown. The case has inspired countless books, documentaries, and theories, but no definitive explanation has ever been found. Modern investigators have used advanced technology to study the case, including computer modeling of wave patterns around the Flannan Isles and detailed analysis of weather data from December 1900. These studies have confirmed that extraordinarily large waves are possible in the area, but they have also highlighted the problems with the official explanation. The case has become a part of maritime folklore, inspiring poems, songs, and stories. The most famous is Wilfred Wilson Gibson's 1912 poem, Flannan Isle, which helped establish the mystery in popular culture. The poem's haunting refrain, "Yet as we crowded through the door, we only saw a table spread for dinner, meat and cheese and bread, but all untouched and no one there," captures the eerie atmosphere of the discovery. The lighthouse itself continued to operate after the tragedy, with new keepers taking over the station. However, the isolation and the memory of the disappearance made it difficult to staff. The lighthouse was eventually automated in 1971, ending nearly a century of human presence on the island. Today, the Flannan Isles remain uninhabited except for seabirds and the occasional research team. The lighthouse still operates, now controlled by remote monitoring systems, but the islands retain their reputation as one of the most mysterious and dangerous places in Scottish waters. The disappearance of the Flannan Isle lighthouse keepers remains one of the most compelling unsolved mysteries in maritime history. 3 experienced professionals vanished without a trace from a secure location, leaving behind only questions and theories. What makes this case so enduring is not just the mystery itself, but what it represents about the power of the sea and the isolation of those who work on its margins. The lighthouse keepers of the 19th and early 20th centuries were the guardians of maritime safety, living in isolation and danger to protect the lives of strangers. Their disappearance reminds us of the risks these men faced and the mysteries that the sea still holds. Whether the 3 keepers were claimed by a rogue wave, fell victim to some other natural disaster, or met a fate we cannot imagine, their story continues to capture our imagination. In an age of GPS and satellite communication, the idea of 3 people simply vanishing seems almost impossible. Yet the empty lighthouse on Eilean Moor stands as a reminder that some mysteries may never be solved. The next time you see a lighthouse beam cutting through the darkness, remember the men who once tended these lights by hand, facing the fury of the sea with nothing but their skill, courage, and dedication to keeping others safe. And remember that somewhere in the North Atlantic, the mystery of what happened to Thomas Marshall, James Duckett, and Donald MacArthur continues to echo across the waves. The sea keeps its secrets, and the Flannan Isles keep theirs.